Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Adaptive Zone podcast. My name is Matthew Boyd. I'm a physiotherapist and running coach. If you enjoy today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're so inclined, share it with a friend. Today, we have a very special episode. It is my first time doing a double interview. So we're going to see how this goes. It's going to test my interviewing skills. And I have two guests that I'm really excited to share with you today. We have Rob Buhmann and Myles Burfield, who have very similar surnames, but I did manage to get it correct, I think. Thank you for joining us, guys.
Hi, Matt.
So, Rob, could we start with you? Could you just tell us a little bit about you and your professional work?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm an exercise scientist, and at the moment I work at a university. So essentially, half of my job is teaching, the other half is research. I guess the way I got to where I am at the moment is I used to be a very keen soccer/football player, and then suffered a lot of injuries. So that kind of spurred my injury into my interest into exercise science rather. So I did an undergraduate exercise science degree, and then I worked in professional soccer for a couple of years as a strength and conditioning coach, and then got really interested in research. So I went back to university to do a PhD, and that kind of led me down the working at the university route.
Nice, cool. And Myles, what about you?
I'm a specialist sports and exercise physiotherapist. So within Australia, the Australian Physio Association has different tiers of, career pathway, and specialisation is the final tier that you can achieve through an examination process in front of a board. And before I went down that, training program, I was umming and ahhing about doing a PhD, and I thought I might dip my foot in the research world, which is how I met with Rob and ended up doing this systematic review. But so now I pretty much work still as a clinician and a little bit as an educator and a Masters of Sports Physio at Australian Catholic University.
Got you. Cool. And so actually, Rob was sharing a little bit of the background to this study. So for the listeners, I was reading a paper by Rob and Myles a few weeks ago and reached out to see if they'd come on the show and talk about it because I really, really liked it. And I think it's going to really help clear a few things up for everyone. And Rob, could you tell us a little bit about the background of how this study, this paper, how it emerged in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. So Myles has got it. Myles is a distance runner himself and works with a lot of runners clinically. And I think there's kind of this misconception that if we do too much running, it's probably bad for our knee joints. And the evidence tells us that's probably not really the case. So Myles was really the one who had the idea for the review, but because he didn't have that research background, he came to me and said, how do we go about doing this? So that was kind of my addition. I kind of knew the research process, knew how to put together a systematic review. So yeah, it was kind of Myles's clinical experience and curiosity, and then I came in with the research perspective to kind of pull it all together.
Myles, what got you interested in that as a topic?
I'm a bit of a keen runner myself, and a marathoner. So I think I just, through my own experience as a runner and through my experience as a physio, I was a little bit frustrated with this, I guess, negative opinion about running, especially distance running. And I was just reading a lot of research that was going against what I was hearing coming from a lot of other medical professionals. And I thought that, as we move forward in the profession, a lot of this is about gathering information as we go. And probably what we needed was to have a look at if the amount of distance really made a difference in the presentation of OA. And if it didn't, then was there some sort of study that we could go on and further do that might show that running may be actually beneficial or helpful for OA presentations?
Yeah, so it would seem that my medical colleagues down under are giving similar advice because in North America, Canada, something I hear every single day from runners is that they've been told to stop running because it's bad for their knees. A week doesn't pass without me hearing that. So
I have the same experience. Yeah.
So that was the sort of genesis and the motivation behind doing the study. So what is Rob? Just to kind of give us an understanding of what this paper does. Like the title is the association between running volume and osteoarthritis prevalence, and it's a systematic review and meta-analysis. Could you kind of unpack that for the listener to explain like what that is?
Yeah, definitely. And if I start going too far down the rabbit hole, Matt, feel free to pull me back. But basically, a systematic review is where we try to summarize the evidence on a particular topic. So there's several kind of parts to a systematic review. First of all, you've got to design and register it. So you have to say, these are the things we're going to look at. This is the data we're going to extract from all of the papers. You have to pre-specify your hypotheses just so that you're not subject to any kind of bias further down the line, because otherwise you can look for things you didn't say you were going to look for and kind of cherry pick your findings a little bit. So that's the first stage, the design and registration. After that, you'll create this search strategy, and you'll apply that search strategy to a number of different databases. So the databases might have different papers. So that's the reason you look at several. So after you do your search, you'll extract all of those papers from those databases. Sometimes it can be several thousand, sometimes it can be 500 or so. I think we had 1,000 or 2,000 miles from memory. So it's a bit of work to kind of sift through those. And so the next stage after you pull those papers is you've got to do your screening. So you screen the titles and abstracts first as kind of like a quick way. And then because you can often see from those things whether the study fits your inclusion criteria or not. So once you do that screening, then you do a full text screening on a significantly reduced number of papers. So usually that be 50, and then you'll exclude a few more because they don't fit your criteria. Again, the study design might be wrong. They might not have measured your outcome correctly. So then you're usually left with anywhere from 10 to 30 as a really rough number. So once you've got your papers, you then extract all of the data. So we were interested in running volumes, NEOA prevalence, plus kind of demographic information, age, weight, split of males and females in each study. So you pull all of that from all of your studies. And then you do a statistical analysis and try and summarize it. So you'll provide like an estimate of, in our case, it was an odds ratio. So essentially how at risk are you of developing, or what's the kind of index for prevalence of NEOA in runners versus people who don't run regularly. But we also try to provide a measure of certainty around that number. So people often read the abstract and see that estimate of, in our instance, it was an odds ratio. But we also try to provide some certainty around that. So something called a confidence interval. And basically, because in research, we'll sample a small subset of the population, we're trying to estimate what's happening in the wider population. So that confidence interval gives us information on what that true measure might be in the wider population. So we try to collect.
Well, can I stop you there for a sec? Because I think we're going to lose people with the terms, with confidence interval and odds ratio. Can you kind of can you dumb that down a little bit for me so we know what you're getting at, like what those things are for?
Yeah, definitely. So our odds ratio is a really commonly used measure in a lot of sports medicine and exercise science and physio research. It's basically if you have a prevalence of something in one population, so in our instance runners, and then a prevalence in another population, so in people who don't run, it's just the ratio of that prevalence. So if it's 50% in runners in terms of NEOA prevalence, and it's 25% in controls, then your odds ratio is going to be 2. So it's just comparing.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it's twice as common in the runners than it is in the controls. But that's not what you found, but that's what that number tells us, is how much more common or less common it is to have knee osteoarthritis if you're a runner versus a sedentary person?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the confidence interval is just a statistical term. It's essentially trying to give us an idea of how precise that estimate is. So you might have an odds ratio. I think ours was around about 0.9. But if the confidence interval ranges from, let's say, 0 to 5, the true value might be anywhere from like running is really beneficial and there's no prevalence of neo runners versus it's really, really high in runners. So that's what we try to do with a systematic review. We try to give an estimate, but then we try and provide some precision around that estimate to give people some certainty as to, is this phenomenon an actual thing, or do we need more research to try and give us a better idea of how precise this actual estimate is?
So you were gathering a bunch of papers that had looked at osteoarthritis in runners versus non-runners. and then you are reading all the research that is relevant, and then you are crunching the numbers to figure out if there's a difference between how many people get osteoarthritis in the runners versus the non-runners, and then you're trying to make sure that you analyze how confident we can be in that statistic. Like, is this accurate, or is this kind of based on bad data, or there's not? It's just kind of it's a range and it's too big. But so how? Well, before we get to the confidence you have in the result, because that's great that you were able to do that. Could you talk to us about like what you did find in the study, and then we can kind of circle back to how confident we can be in the results?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing we found is what we essentially tried to do is compare running generally in runners versus non-runners, and then we tried to split it up and do a slightly different analysis where we split it up into people who do a low running volume, a moderate running volume, and a high running volume, and then we just looked at the prevalence of those groups compared with people who don't run. So broadly speaking, there's no increased prevalence of knee OA in people who just run regularly in general compared with controls. So that's not necessarily too novel. That's been reported before, but it sounds like there's still a little bit of a gap between what we know in research and what's done in practice, which is pretty common in sport and exercise science. The thing that's a bit more I guess new about our study is looking at those subgroups, and so we found no evidence either way. So no evidence that the prevalence of OA is increased in runners or decreased in runners versus control. Some of those statistics give us a bit of an idea as to where it might go, but we don't have any strong evidence to say it's increased, even in the really, really high runners. If anything, the evidence was leaning towards that the prevalence might be a bit lower in that high volume running group. So no increased incidence in runners overall, possibly even a decreased incident prevalence in the runners who do really high weekly running volumes.
Okay. So when you looked at all of these studies and you crunched all the numbers, you found that the amount of people who had knee osteoarthritis was similar in regular people who don't run versus people who run a little bit versus people who run a typical amount versus people who run a lot. They all had a similar amount of kind of occurrence of knee arthritis?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And okay, so Myles, could you weigh in here? Like Rob was saying that you guys sort of divided the group up into, not the group, but your analysis into runners who run a little bit, a regular, a sort of typical amount, and then a lot. How did you guys decide what those amounts were, and what were they?
Yeah, look, it was really challenging, and we were kind of hamstrung a little bit by the articles that were included in the systematic review. So, I mean, our high running group was over 48 k's a week, which I guess from a distance running perspective, we probably still wouldn't call high mileage. And as Rob was saying, that was actually the group that probably showed the clearest benefit of running versus non-running. We saw less of an obvious pattern or association in the lower running groups. The lower running groups was zero. I think we had no running was 0 to 8 kilometers a week, and then we had a low running group. And Rob, tell me if I've got the numbers wrong here, because it's been a while since I read the paper, but I think it was 8 to 20, and then 20 to 36 or something like that. And even with those groups, we struggled because a lot of the papers didn't clearly articulate how many Ks they'd been running in their study cohort, or they were self-reported mileage over like long periods of time. So there's probably some accuracy issues there before the invention of things like Strava. So I think all in all, there's probably a large risk of bias in a lot of the research that was done, which always makes it hard for us to get really clear findings. So I think when we're interpreting it, we can say that we've probably got enough research now to say that running's not bad for your knee. we could definitely do some more high quality research to show if running is beneficial.
Mm.
But I think I personally would be happy to tell people that running is not detrimental as long as it's done the right way.
Mic drop. I'm going to unscrew this mic and like the final word. I think it's. I liked what you said there about like we have enough research now, because I've lost count of how many papers I've read. Like probably a bunch of them were in your study, right? But I certainly didn't read all the ones you guys did. But like it's the same thing over and over again, and it was really nice. There's another one came out 2023. I was reading it the other day. That was more survey based. I can't remember the author, I'm afraid. The same thing, right? Like looking at the same kind of thing, measuring it in a different way, and again, same amounts of osteoarthritis in like controls versus runners. What was interesting to me about your study, when you looked at one of the studies that I read a while back, that I think was one of the more like influential ones, was that I think you guys were kind of trying to figure out like, okay, well, there seems to be maybe a suggestion that running is good for your knees or running's not bad for your knees, but what if you run a lot? Like, and that's something that I saw, Anderson Gelly or something like that. There was a study a while back that like sorted into competitive runners and said they had more arthritis. Like, where do we sit there now? I don't know if either of you guys can weigh in on this one. Like, is there still a risk that you can run too much, and that we don't know if that's bad for you or not?
$1 million question.
I'll let you jump in there, Myles, because you've probably got more clinical experience in that space.
Okay. I mean, that paper you talk about, yeah, they did compare professional runners, and I think there's probably a difficulty in comparison there, just because you've got a group who are known to run through injury and run through pain. So again, it would be difficult to compare just mileage with this process of having to compete on an injured limb. I know, interestingly enough, there was a study that came out just this year called Outrunning the Grim Reaper, and looked at longevity of the first 200 sub 4 minute mile runners. I don't know if you've come across that, but
I'm going to have, that's a title and a half, that one.
Yes.
I'm not going to forget that.
But I think it shows that people are definitely exploring this idea, and what they've showed is that they've analysed the first 200 people to run a sub 4 minute mile, which obviously takes a large amount of training and excessive Ks, and it means you're an elite runner. And they actually had a higher longevity than your average person. So I think it was something like 5 years. They lived 5 years longer than the average person today. But if they backdated it to people of that age, it was more like 9 to 10 years longer. So they're saying that, okay, even these excessive training habits probably don't have negative health benefits on us in the long term.
What about our knees, though?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't think it's been assessed accurately from a knee health point of view. But I think if we're going to read between the lines, we don't have clear evidence that high mileage alone is a problem, but we probably have a little bit of suggestion that if you're going to push your body when you're in an injured state, then potentially you may have some negative outcomes.
Okay, so it's maybe getting into speculation here, but it might be about your approach to like injuries and such, and less about the number of kilometers you're logging.
Definitely, and that would fit with our understanding of the pathogenesis of the disease, or how the disease evolves over time, and the processes behind that disease evolution.
Can you unpack that a bit for me? What do you mean?
Well, okay. So, we originally thought that osteoarthritis was a mechanically led problem, so almost like wear and tear on the joint. But now we're starting to understand that it's actually a lot of a representation of the health of your body. So your metabolic health and other inflammatory processes going on within the joints, which is why we can see such high rates in a sedentary population or a highly obese population, or people with diabetes and such. So the risk factors for OA are largely metabolic and lifestyle, and not so much based on load, as we've probably thought a couple of decades ago. So when we think about that, when we think about the other side of that, load is good for the body. So if we've got osteopenia, we've got weak bones, the first thing the doctor said is go to the gym, lift heavy stuff, jump up and down, have load through your bones, which stimulates bone remodeling and growth. So we've got this process where metabolic health, which includes exercise and being active, is good for your joints, and impact and loading is good for your joints. And the more impact and loading we do, the stronger our joints get. So then if you continue to load and load regularly and load in a progressive way, you just get stronger and stronger and stronger bones. But if we overload, and we overload in a condition where our joints can't tolerate that load, then we would expect the body to have an injury and then go backwards.
So that's where that listening to your body kind of, it's your response to pain, it's your response to pain mostly. That's what dictate.
Yeah, and I think pain would be the best indicator for most people. In a clinical setting, we would look at images and especially look for things like subchondral edema, so fluid in the bone under the cartilage, which would suggest that joint isn't tolerating the load you're doing. Because often running, we're always running through a little bit of pain, but I think if you're doing high levels of loading on a joint that's got imaging signs that the joint's not tolerating that load, then you're probably having a risk of these long-term changes and negative joint health changes.
So if someone was running like a lot and they'd had knee problems in the past and they were worried about it, then potentially they could work with a medical provider to take maybe a series of x-rays over a period of time to see if their knees were okay with that? Or is that not because you were saying that pain might not be the best indicator?
Yes, I think situations. And probably what you find with your own clinical caseload, Matt, is that if you've got pain that's reoccurring and getting worse, that's a sign that something's not right. So that would be a good indicator to get a professional involved. You could do some imaging that would show that there's actually nothing structurally wrong, and then we can figure out what the source of that pain is and potentially run through pain. But I think if you were ignorantly running through pain without considering that there might be something structurally there, you're potentially running at a higher risk of hurting yourself long term.
So something you can tell me if you think this, the way I approach it with runners is if the trend is in the right direction. So either you're running more and the pain is either staying at a low level or getting better, or if you're running the same amount and your pain is improving over time, that's a sign that your body's adapting and it's probably fine. But if it's trending the other direction where you're getting more pain over time, or you're able to run less because you're having to because of the pain, does that work as a strategy? You know, if runners were going to apply that logic, which is quite simple, would they be missing anything?
No, I think that's fine logic, because we don't want to have this idea that we can't run in pain and pain's always the end of the world. I think the only thing I'd add to that would be loss of function. If you can't run normally, you can't hop, and you've got some compensation strategies, likely you're adapting to something that could be structural.
Okay. And so something that so can we take away from the research paper that you guys did, Rob, that like as far as we can tell, there's no evidence that running's bad for your knees, and there's no evidence that running more than say 50k a week is bad for your knees either, as it currently stands. Is that what the big takeaway is from this paper?
Yeah, that's correct, Matt. And I know people are probably looking for a hard and fast answer on this, but that's probably the best we can give. The reason being is if running is definitely beneficial, it's going to improve your knee joint health. What we need to do is a study over a period of time. You need to track people who don't have knee OA. You need to get them to follow some kind of running regime, and you need to follow them long enough that they then go on to develop knee OA, and then you need to image them regularly to see the progression of that OA. So you can imagine that takes a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of money. It's going to require a lot of expertise. So that's the reason why we probably don't have the 100% hard and fast answer to the question yet. I know there are a couple of universities who are doing those kind of studies and hopefully should be out within the next few years. Yeah. There's a university in Melbourne called La Trobe University. I'm fairly sure who are doing that study at the moment. They're tracking activity in runners over a really long period of time. Doing some
Is that Trails one?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Why a definitive answer, but I think we've got enough evidence to at least say, look, we know it's not going to be bad, and there's a lot of mechanistic stuff that looks at to a single bout of running or a single bout of exercise, and we know that kind of stimulates some remodeling. So, like mechanistically, it makes sense that at some level, some kind of running or some kind of loading is going to be beneficial. But yeah, it's really just a question of how much, and we don't have a hard and fast answer, unfortunately.
And in amongst all of that research that you guys went through on arthritis and running, is there any indication that if you've been already diagnosed with arthritis, you should behave differently? Or would it still be, listening to your knees the way Myles was suggesting and potentially being more proactive if you've had a history of recurring issues? Or do you need to be more careful if you have had an X-ray or an MRI that showed arthritis? So it's not like you have quote unquote normal knees that you're then running on, but you have signs of arthritis already. Do you need to then behave differently, or do we not know? Or like where do we stand on that?
I think there's probably two parts to that. Well, I've got two parts to that answer. So from a research perspective, I think there's one study from 2008, and it wasn't included in our review because they just asked people, they didn't ask durations, they didn't ask distances, they just asked time spent running per week. So they followed these people over 18 years and did MRIs at a few time points, and they saw the progression of knee OA in the running group was a lot smaller and a lot slower than the progression of knee OA in the control group or the sedentary group. So it went from something like 20 to 30% in the runners over the 18 years versus 0, so no prevalence, to about 30% in the control group. So you get this increased incidence or prevalence. So to me, that kind of suggests over the long term, even if you sustain or develop knee OA, you can still manage it, as Myles was talking about earlier. So that's kind of the first part to how I'd answer that. The second part is from personal experience. So in my right knee, I've got an old meniscus injury, and I had a meniscectomy. So I had the lateral meniscus taken out. There's definitely some signs already of knee OA there because I've got pain and I've got clicking. So I know there's probably something going to, I have to manage that down the track. But at the moment, I go for a run a few times a week. I lift some weights a few times a week. And there are instances where I do too much and it becomes a little bit painful. But when I draw back, that pain seems to subside. And if I do an amount I'm comfortable with, there are absolutely no problems. So I really just, it's the main thing you need to think about, regardless of whether you do or don't have your knee OA, is how you manage the load.
Yeah, because my interpretation of that, what you just said they did in that study and found, would be for you, okay, well, I'm pretty sure that I have some arthritic change in this knee because of my history, and it would be better for me to be running a couple of times a week and lifting weights than to be resting it and kind of sparing it. That would be worse, and the arthritis might progress a little quicker if you became more sedentary.
Yeah, correct. And as Myles said, we know there are a number of risk factors, right? One of those risk factors is people with a higher BMI. So if you've got a higher BMI, obviously you've got a higher weight force acting through your knee joint. So essentially think of it as like when you contact the ground when you're running, because of that increased weight, you've got more load going through the knee. The other thing with BMIs, with high BMIs and obesity, is we've got this higher level of systemic inflammation, and we know that can contribute to our increased prevalence or risk of knee OA as well. So if I don't exercise, I'm not expending as much energy, I might put on some weight, which is going to contribute to those two risk factors as well. So you your load management, that keeping up that running might help to stimulate some remodeling of the good cartilage that's still there. But it's also going to help you manage your weight, manage your inflammation, and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's validating to hear what you guys are saying here, because something I say to kind of try and simplify it is that if you run, you'll be more healthy, and more healthy people have healthier knees. And if you don't run, you'll become less healthy, and less healthy people have less healthy knees, because the knees are part of the person. And so is that kind of what you're getting at there? But because they are staying healthy by running, there's that kind of this systemic effect where their knees are healthier because they are healthier. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of simplifying it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll just keep saying it then. That's good. I'm always nervous when I ask researchers. I'm like, I say this. Is this okay? And like sometimes they're like, kind of.
No, but that's the difficult thing, isn't it? Is you, like we said before, people are often after a black and white answer, and you can say, this is what we'd recommend, but you need to think about this, this, and this.
Well, I think I think we have a good understanding from what you guys are explaining, like where we sit in terms of evidence right now. So that's really helpful. One question that I do think that will be coming up in some of the listeners' mind is, does it matter like how old you are? Like if you're older, does it then become riskier to run, or does it then become riskier to run more? I don't know if you want to jump in on that one, Myles.
Again, this would only be my own interpretation of having read a body of research, and not necessarily what the research shows. But I think your risk around running and knee health comes from your loading history. And unfortunately, for an older athlete, it's a lot about what you did when you were an adolescent. So our bone development is largely driven through pre-puberty and adolescence, where we get most of our bone mineral density, and you're stuck with that for the rest of your life. So if you have played, or if I give you a scenario, if you have played some contact sport, or you've done something like gymnastics, that we call it high osteogenic loading sports, that are really good at promoting bone density as an adolescent, and you've always eaten a lot of calcium, and you've got a high dairy diet, and you've got this good bone mineral density, and you've always done a little bit of running as an older athlete is not going to be as challenging for you as someone who maybe came from a swimming background, which has got low osteogenic loading, not a lot of bone loading, didn't do any running through their adolescence, maybe doesn't eat dairy or is lactose intolerant. If this athlete was going to start running at the age of 50 to 55, I would be a lot more cautious and have a really, really slow progression. So when we're looking at the older athlete returning to running, we're looking at a lot of these lifestyle factors and loading history. And like Rob said, often it's not black and white. It really comes down to the individual and what we could calculate their loading tolerance to be. If that's, and yes, not a very simple answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right, because we don't want simple if it's wrong, right? So,
yeah.
So I think, let me try and summarize what I think you're saying there. Like, if someone's an older runner and they're worried about arthritis, it actually is not so much about how much they're running now. It is more about like whether they did what you might call like pivoting cutting sports when they were a teenager. And if they did, they'll be a bit more robust to running in their old age. And if they didn't, they should be maybe a little bit more cautious in their approach.
Yes. Maybe what I could say is that and again, this is personal belief, but I believe everyone can do some amount of running. But the amount that you can do and the amount you can tolerate is highly influenced by what you've done in your earlier life. So, so finding the right amount, and you definitely, the layperson, most people would probably need a guidance for this from a coach or a health professional, but finding the right amount is going to be really individual and really specific for each person.
And so either of you guys can weigh in on this one, but it's one I come across a lot of the time with our runners is they'll have some sort of injury like Rob's, right? And then they'll get like a surgery, maybe like a meniscectomy, or they'll have an ACL repair or something like that. They'll have some sort of trauma. And later in life, they kind of get into running, right? So, and then they start having trouble with their knees. And then that's when they're often told to stop. Like, you had this injury when you were younger. Now you can't run on it because you had that injury. And we know that those injuries increase your risk of arthritis. And then if you add the running on top, you're going to be in trouble. And should those runners behave any different based on what we currently know? Or should those runners, even if they've had an injury, maybe it was a major knee injury or something like that when they were younger, who are at an elevated risk for arthritis, should they behave differently in the future or still have the same approaches as you guys have kind of walked through today?
I think the approach should be, yeah. I think the approach should, I don't think it should be too different, Matt, to be honest. Like we've said several times already, I think load management is the key. It's just they're probably just starting from a smaller amount of overall load. And so in that instance, it's probably just better to be overly cautious initially and do it. Look, even if you do some 100-meter intervals and just do 5 or 6 of them and start off at a really, really low ceiling, see how that impacts your pain and function. And if that's okay, the next week, maybe you can do a little bit more. The other thing I will say about the effects are difficult to tease out, right? Because as we age as well, we know our ability to adapt and recover from exercise isn't as good as when we were younger. So sometimes it's difficult to tease out those effects of, okay, am I sore and painful because I'm just not used to this amount of exercise, or I'm exercising too close to my last session, versus is this actual pain due to structural damage or something like that. So sometimes being wary of those things can give people a little bit more confidence in maybe pushing the envelope a little bit more. But I would largely say the approach is similar. It's just your absolute levels of how much you do and maybe how much you increase week to week is going to be slightly lower. And just be mindful as well that it's always sensible and good for performance to have deloading weeks as well. So typically every 3, 4, 5 weeks, have a week where you do half as much as what you might usually do, and then go a little bit more the next week.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I guess if we look at some of the research on large-scale injuries like ACL injuries, we've got a couple of decades of longitudinal studies there that don't show an increased OA in a significant knee injury population with people who've returned to sport. So
that's not what I thought. I must be behind. Is that I thought that if you had an ACL injury when you were younger, your chances of having symptomatic osteoarthritis later in life were higher. Am I wrong there?
No, you're dead on. As soon as you have the ACL injury, your risk of OA goes up.
Right. Okay.
But if you have an ACL injury and you go back to sport, you don't have an increased risk of OA compared to someone who's had an ACL injury and doesn't go back to sport.
Oh, so it's not having the it's not the going back to sport doesn't do the knee harm.
Correct.
So you don't need to kind of protect it by not running or not going back to soccer if that's your thing.
That's right.
Okay.
That's what we'd infer from the ACL research. Yeah, that just not doing anything and not using the knee doesn't decrease your chance of knee OA.
Got you. Yeah. So a more specific one I had, and this I wasn't sure on until I read your paper, and now I'm a little more sure, is people like that, because this is a very common scenario. I can think of like 6 or 7 of the runners we're working with at the minute who've had like that type of injury or like multiple surgery on meniscectomies and all that kind of stuff. And they're kind of having knee troubles. That's why they come to us. And they're having trouble because they're going for the marathon and they want to keep doing marathons. And they're being told, like, at least don't do the marathon. And I was like, I don't know, maybe that is the right call, like, because you would be at lower volumes of running. And then I read your study and I was like, well, maybe there's no reason to limit yourself to half marathons if you have that history based on what we currently know. So I'm just wondering if you could clear that up for me. Like, I'm not sure I'm being terribly clear there, Myles. Sorry, but
Yes.
that's what I'm
No,
wondering.
I think I get what you're saying. So you're saying these runners who've run marathons in the past
Mm-hmm.
now have an irritable knee or have knee pain, and they're not
Mm-hmm.
sure if they can get back to marathon running.
And they have a history of traumatic injury and like scans and surgery and arthritis on their MRIs and like that kind of stuff. So they have a history with that knee. And
Yes.
then the thinking is, okay, well, let's level down from the marathon and go to the 10Ks and the halves to kind of let's not go over the top kind of thing. And now I'm wondering, is there any reason to do that if they like marathon? Because people who like marathons, right?
Yes. That's a good question. I think probably when we go into that realm of athlete management, we're probably outside of what the research can tell us, and we're looking at the individual's preferences and a risk versus reward, conversation. So probably what we'd be saying is, look, you've got some changes in your knee. You're not going to tolerate as much running as someone without these changes, but you still have the potential to tolerate lots of running if you build up gradually and you do your loading properly. So if you really want to run a marathon, we could build you up to that and we could aim for it, as long as we're not pushing through, crazy pain or limping and all these signs that your knee's not tolerating what you're doing. And if you make it to marathon training and do a race without blowing up your knee, you can do it.
And then you could keep doing it as long as your knee was telling you that it's okay with it. So if you did it, slowly built up, went back to marathon running, and your knee felt fine, and then you did 2 marathons the following year and your knee felt fine, and you did 2 the following year and your knee felt fine, like as long as your knee's telling you that it's feeling okay with this,
Yep.
then you don't need to necessarily reduce your volume or reduce the race distance just because of your history. You can keep running those as long as you need. But if you were like every year your knee like really struggled through your training, you'd be like, well, maybe your knee's not up to doing that much mileage, and that's just your situation.
That's well put. And I think
Okay.
if I was monitoring myself, I'd probably look at a few, testing points. I'd make sure that my knee could still bend. I still had full or normal range of motion, and I wasn't getting swelling after my long runs, and just these indicators that my joint is still happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could use them as extras, like swelling afterwards, full range of movement, and no pain, just so it's not just pain you're relying on. You have a couple of other things that you can watch out for.
That's right. Yep.
Cool.
I run in a running group that's got quite a lot of good runners in it, and there's a few of them who are older age masters athletes, and some of these guys have, quite advanced OA on scans, and they're managing 50, 60K weeks, running sub 19, sub 18, 5Ks, and doing some
Bloody
really
hell.
high quality training. Yeah. And they have sometimes little episodes of small amounts of pain if they overload or if they do races back to back, and but generally they tolerate the running and the training really well. And if it's a big part of your life and it's something you want to do and it makes you happy, there's some really good evidence there that you can do it the right way.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Rob, do you have anything to leave us with?
It's kind of leading on from that point. The advice I usually give to people when it's any type of injury is just, you don't have to stop what you're doing. Just try and adjust, right? So if you are really into marathoning and you've got problems with your knees, instead of doing 2 marathons a year, maybe dial it back to 1. And I'm leaning more on a strength and conditioning background here, but preparing for a marathon is a hell of a lot of work, right? So dialing it back to 1 means you're doing 1 marathon prep as opposed to 2 marathon preps per year. All of a sudden, that's a lot more manageable, right? So yeah, adjust your workload, something to measure your running load, even if it's a simple, app on your phone. Use that so you've got something to track, and so you can increase it or decrease it week to week as needed.
That's fantastic. I'll in the description to this episode, I'll put a link to the study that you guys did. It was brilliant. Thank you for that. It really helped clear things up, and having this interview opportunity to clarify some of this has really helped me understand like where we are right now with this, because it is a I'm answering questions with runners about this on a pretty much daily basis. It's really helpful to have some real evidence that we can kind of lean on. So thank you for that. And I'll put a link to that. I'll put a link to both your ResearchGate profiles if people want to go and follow your research. Is there anywhere you guys would like to share any social media or anything that in case people want to go and connect with you there?
I do have a Twitter handle, or an X handle, as I think you call it now, Matt. I'm more of a just observe things on there because there's some nice researchers that I do follow. But my X/Twitter handle is just at Buhmann Robert. If you want to follow that as well. But yeah, I don't do too much on there, just observe more than anything.
I fall into the same category, unfortunately. I'm not on the socials very much, but I could definitely give you my website for anyone who's in Australia and wants to look us up.
Yeah, that's good. I'll put a link to that. I'm just making some notes here so I don't forget. Yeah, researchers are never on social, just ResearchGate, but don't worry about it.
Good to hear, validated.
All right, thank you guys both so much for joining today. This is going to be an incredibly valuable episode. I'm sure there's going to be runners out there who are going to be like, this is exactly what I need to kind of be more clear about my situation, and the study as well. It's for the listeners, the systematic review of meta-analysis is a huge undertaking, and we really appreciate it because it's very helpful for us.
Thanks for having us, Matt.